Hello and welcome to the Genja tutorials. Today I'm going to take you through installing Git and building your own Git server. Right now I'm logged on to my client machine, which is Ubuntu. For my server, I'm going to be using a Raspberry Pi. So I'm just going to log into that now. And the very first thing I'm going to do is install Git. By default, it's not installed in this Linux distro of Debian. So Git. So that's going to install. So that's going to take a minute just to install. So Git is a version control system, well, a distributed version control system. By distributed, what that means is the shared repository doesn't have the only copy of the full configuration. When you use the system or use Git, basically developers download the entire source code to their device when they clone it, when you clone the repository, so that it's distributed. So there's always kind of like a fail-safe. Should you need to kind of rebuild because maybe something got corrupted, it's kind of distributed. Right, so now that's installed. Let me clear this. I'm going to create a new user. We're going to call that user Git. So we'll sudo add user Git. Set your password. And that should pass. And then just enter for this. And yes, that's correct. And then what we're going to do is we're going to jump into that user's account now. So sudo su Git. So now we're logged in as Git. So I'll just clear this. So what you're going to want to do now is we're just going to list the directories as defaults. We're viewing all the hidden files as well. So making note there's no .ssh folder. So basically the .ssh kind of stores any keys that you may have created, authorized keys for logging in, known host files. But for this Git server, we're going to want to be using keys just to make it easier rather than typing in a password. So if we go back over to our client machine and generate some keys, we'll do that with the use of ssh-keygen. So if we do ssh-keygen, and then we want to specify the file, the location of where to output the file. So what we're going to do is absolute path ssh, and then we're going to name it as well. So basically we're naming it, the file. By default it's RSA, but I want to call it id._git. Then we want to specify the type, it's an RSA. And then we're going to specify a comment, capital C, and just comment. We're just going to add git and your server's IP address. And that should create pairs. We want to set a passphrase, so it asks for a password if you go to user keys, just to add a bit of security, or added security. And then again, and now it's create the keys. So what the keys, we can copy them over using ssh-copy-id. So if we want to test, first of all, can we even get onto our device with a username and password? So let's just check that. So we've created the device or the new user ID, so we should be able to log in. Yep, so is prompting. So we are good. So I'm just going to log out. I'll just clear this screen. So now I'm going to use ssh-copy-id, specify the identity file location. So it's where we created the file, and the key. So we named it git, but we're going to copy the contents of the public key over. The private key stays on your client machine, public key gets copied over. But using this tool, even if you negated and didn't put the .pub, it would basically go through and say, okay, public key should end .pub, so we're going to use that key. And then the server's IP address. If you watch my previous video on how to create SSH keys, it would explain the detail in the private and public keys and explain what's in the directory or what's created when you use ssh-keygen. So now we're just going to hit enter. It's going to copy over. It's going to ask you to enter your password for your server to log in and authenticate. So now it's saying that it's copied over. Now log into the machine with ssh-git. So if I do this, so at the moment I didn't, because I'm not using the defaults, so I'll cancel this. Because I'm not using the defaults, it's still using just the standard password authentication. So if I say I want to use an identity of ssh-id ID git, now it's asking you to enter the password for your key. So now we have a key, we're going to authenticate, and we're in with the key. So it was telling us to confirm the contents. So first of all, we're just doing LSLA. As we can see, it's .sh. So if we cd into that, .sh, so we change directory because that's a directory at the moment. It's created the authorized key file. As you can see here, directories are denoted with a D. This is a file. So we can vim it. So authorized keys, cat, any favorite editor. So now we can see, yep, the key is there, and this is a comment we put, so it's easy to identify. So that's basically what that message was saying. Go in and identify that it's copied the correct key over. If you have multiple ones, this is a comment. You can put whatever you want there, and it's easy to identify. So now what we're gonna want to do is, so now that we've logged in, we've established that we've got our SSH keys working, we'll just go back to the top directory, cd. We're going to create a new directory called project.git. And then we're just going to cd enter it. So now this is where we initiate and start using git. So we're going to just use git init, and we'll use the option bear. So what this does is it creates a bear repository for if you're using a shared location. So the first initial update, it will just dump it in there and create the project, but it allows, let me show you. So if I do ls.la now, so it creates everything that would be, if we do it on our client machine, we're not going to use beer because we want this to be shared. So this is pretty much the contents of the .git directory without including the directory, the working directory is known as. So we've now created that. So we're pretty much set and good. We've got a shared repository set up. Or better still, we can use tree. I'll use that with, just so that we can display the hidden files as well. Not that there's any in this output, but this will just go down into the different directories. So if you noticed in the previous view, it didn't show us the contents of the directories, like all the hooks. If you haven't got tree, you can install that using sudo apt install tree. So let me just clear this. So now we're going to go back over, we're going to log out. I still got a connection open actually here, but I'm going to log out back to my client. So now I have logged out, and I'm going to make a directory. I'm just going to call it test-git, test_git. And I'm going to cd into that. And now I'm going to initiate git here. This initiates different. I'm not going to use the bear option in this instance. I'm just going to hit git. So now it's saying it's initialized, it's an empty git repository. So let's see, what is it? So I'll just do that. If you notice now, it's .git. Jumping back over here, if I cd into project.git, it had different contents, right? It had the contents of, if I do tree, it had the contents of .git without the .git. So that's the difference between the two. .git specifies the working directory, pretty much. That's what it's known as. So let me clear this. So now we've got that. We will kind of want to create our first initial commit. So we've created the repository. We want to create some content so we can push to our server. So the first thing I like to do is create a .git ignore file. So there's some contents, whether it's sensitive data, any files that may be changing. And I normally do that. Let me go back. So if you go to GitHub, GitHub's repository has a git ignore. And I'll go back again. It has the git ignore, and it's got all these different kind of boilerplate templates. So what we want is Python. I do a lot in Python, so that's what I want for myself. So go to Python and then just click on the raw. And I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go back to my session, and I'm just going to do wget hyphen capital O. So I want to rename it, because if I don't rename it, it's going to be called python.gitignore, and it's going to be ignored. It's not going to be taken as a git ignore file. So it's git ignore. And then just going to paste in the address. So if you notice here, like I was saying, python git ignore is the name of it. So this is just gonna download the contents. So now it's downloaded. And we now have that new file. So what does that mean? So if I do a git status, it says we've got untracked files. What an untracked file is, basically we haven't added it into tracking just yet. So it's there, it's like, well, okay, you're not tracking it. So we need to add it basically. This was to say use git add file. So let me just clear this. So if I do git add, so if you just do a dot period, basically it will just add all the files. You can specify the file name if you want, or you can use -- all. So I'm just going to do this, and then we'll do status again. So now it's saying it's pretty much saying it's basically this state is saying it's staged. You want to commit it because now it's kind of tracked and it's saying, oh, this has changed. We need to save it. So to save it to the repository, it's git commit. This is our very first commit. So -m to add a message, and then initial commit added git ignore. So now I'm saying, okay, fine, we've done that, we've added it, one file's changed and it's been created. So now we'll go to git status again. It's clean, nothing to commit, work entry is clean. The work entry is basically this view that we're in now. How do I explain it? It's basically, it's saying all your track files or anything that we can see in this current state in your folder is clean. There's no changes. There's nothing to be committed. And then you have your stage and non-stage files. I have a blog which basically goes through in more detail, whereas unstaged files is basically, say I make a change to .git ignore and then add content to it, it's saying on stage until if it's not added, it's on stage. Once I add it, it's staged and ready to be committed. But there's quite a few details. So now this is only saved locally. We want to push it up to the server here. So if I clear this, what we need to do is and I'll clear this. So I'm back on the client machine. We need to set up a connection. So you do that using git remote add, and then it's given a short name. You can use origin. That's kind of like the known thing to do. Git remote add origin. So you go by that name, and then you specify the address. So and user. But before that, I'm going to add my ssh-keygen. So there's a tool, add, and then identity. Hold on, let me just see if that. Yeah, add. What? ssh-id get. Okay, so basically this is saying my agent hasn't started. So there's a tool called ssh-agent, which I'm trying to add my key to so that it doesn't prompt me for my username and password every time I use it. I'm trying to get around having to use a password all the time. So to start up is eval and ssh-agent s. So that starts it. And then if I go back to this now, it will add my key. Sorry. My key should be okay, so it doesn't specify that. Getting a little bit confused with the copy ID. So this is the password. Okay, so now it's added. And you can check that using ssh-add. So now it's added. So I'll just clear this. So we wanted to add the remote origin. It's not required to do the ssh keys because we're just adding it to the config file. Remote add origin and let's get at 100, and then you specify, because we created the directory in the home users directory, we just need to specify where the bare git repository is. So this should add it now. So we can check git remote. We can check, basically, this is just if you want a bit more of a verbose view, -v. So it says we can fetch and push to this. So this is added. And all that was done was, if we cat.git config, it's basically added the remote is origin, that's the short name for it. This is the URL, this is our connection, this is how we connect to it. And this is basically a view of that kind of configuration. So now what we want to do is we want to do git push origin to master. Let me try logging out. Cancel that. Okay. I'll log out altogether. Vim.git config. I specified the wrong address. So we do a git remote remove origin and then we want to again, if I can type the address correctly. So you have to remove it first and then re-add it. And then if we clear that and do our git push, origin to master, it now pushes the file, the contents over. You can reconnect if you want to your server. Using password authentication here. And now cd into the project.git. And then if we use tree, we just make this clear. Use tree. You can specify all hidden files if you want. So this is the contents now. So it's updated, it's done something, it's created 3 objects. It's created, what we can't see, these are sh1 hashes, 40 characters included in that. And it's adding this head reference as well. So these 3 items are basically known as the blob object. I don't know which one it is, you'd have to view them. Blob object, you have the tree object and the commit object. That's why there's 3 objects there. The tree basically, sorry, the commit object points to a tree. The tree has a list of blobs, and the blob is basically the contents of the file. So now we know that's working. We've copied over, it's working. We now have a working repository. So if we click now, we've got a git ignore file there. Done our update, logged in, can see that it's copying data over. We've made our initial connection. So now what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna just want to check if we can actually clone some data from this, pull this information down now. So now we're going to emulate this. So we're just going to clear this. So to simulate this, we're going to create a new directory called clone. So if we cd out of this, taking us back to our home directory, and we're just going to create a directory called clone. We're going to cd into clone, and then we're going to use git clone. So we need to specify user at 192.168.10. Trying to get it right this time. Project dot git. So you specify username, server address, and the directory. So that's your clone. So what's happened? It's created a project directory. So to make things a bit more visible, if I do tree, first, tree 8, we can see it's got the dot, it's created basically it's named. So I could have just done this in the home directory and it would have just called the project. Basically it took that from the bare repositories project folder name, drop in the .git. The .git is a naming convention, and that's what it's named. This folder as it's named. Basically, when you name your projects, you name it according to what you want it to be. So then it's just built a normal Git repository, so working directory, slightly different. So it's got objects here. which is slightly different to what's on the actual server. It's a different setup. But now we know we should have, if I clear this, cd into project, I do an SLA, and now have my git ignore file. It's cloned the project. So if I go back and cd into test git, and if I just clear this, do a tree, -a because we want to see everything. See, it's a slightly different setup. So in the previous view, it had packs, whereas these are just raw objects. It's slightly different. It packed the info with a clone. And that's it. So now, basically, we have a working Git server where we can share projects, collaborate. Next, we'll go over the commands and how to update, revert changes, and into more detail into the use. But now we have a working Git server. Thanks for watching. Until next time.